notes, and I want to make sure that my voice carries. But I'm very, very pleased to be invited here. I've been listening to you for the last 2 days speak about your theatres, and I'm hoping that some of what I'm talking about will also reach over to you. The format I want to use is to talk for about 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, and then debate, because there's nothing more boring than someone just reading something out or just talking it through. But I wanted to raise some concepts, because I think that we're all here, and we know why we're here, because we're committed to theatre, okay? And and quite often a commitment to theatre is more than just being a profession. It's a calling or a vocation. You can make more money somewhere else. You can have job security somewhere else. Your family will be happier with you if you do something else. But for you, theatre is the thing which calls you. It's so important that you're prepared to suspend all your other work for the next 10 days to actually sit here and discuss its significance. It means something to you. So it's the perfect audience. And so the very first thing I want to say is that we're all here for that reason. And all of us probably have very personal stories about why we think theatre is important. For me, it happened at the age of about 10. I was sent by my parents to see a Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Sounds very banal. I went to it and something happened. I can't tell you exactly what the thing was, but I knew from that moment that I had to work in theatre. Years later I found out that the production I saw was Peter Brook's seminal Midsummer Night's Dream. But hey, for a 10-year-old, it's theatre. You enter and you never leave. And it is that which I care about. But the problem was, I'm no actor. In fact, standing in front of groups, as Milena knows, terrifies me. So you've got me really at your advantage tonight. I'm not a technical person. I really, if I rig the lights, you'd all be in mortal danger. But I really care about it, and I know what it can do, and I know what it means. So what was I going to do? Well, I thought about it for a while. I grew up, I left school, I travelled around the world, and I returned back to my home country, and I thought, what do I say I am? What's my profession? So I told people, I'm an arts manager. No idea what that meant. And even more outrageously, I was given a job as a theatre manager. It was absolutely delicious and absolutely terrifying. There were no courses in the subject, and I was running a musical theatre company in Australia with some of Australia's best directors and actors at the time, and running, I think in India you can appreciate this, pantechnians up and down one side of the country to the other, striking out one evening and bumping in the next, and with all the incumbent problems that you have. And I was 26 years old, I knew nothing about theatre, and I was terrified. And what I didn't have was what generations after me had had, which was the actual advantage of having programs in arts management, of actually speaking to you about the things that you need to know how to do it. So I was in over my head and drowning in plundering life, because it's the most heady feeling. So I wanted to say that the very first thing for me about theatre management, about arts management, is I believed in the product. Believe vitally in it. So every time I was really bored and doing cash flow, every time I had to go into a funding body, every time I had to explain why the actor had cut up the wig and the wig maker was going to charge me thousands for it, and I didn't know what to do, I knew why I was doing it. Hey, you know the feeling. Terrible, right? But you do it, you know what the bigger purpose is. So there's a level of functionality in arts management, you know, filling in the forms, knowing it. You've got to know all of these things. But if it doesn't have a purpose, it has no meaning. So the meaning is really, really important. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the feeling of that. So For me, when a production goes up and I care about it, as an arts manager, it's that moment when the show goes down and that second before the applause, when you feel that breath of the audience before something happens, and you know, I've been part of this. I'm not on the stage, I'm not on the rigging, I'm not sitting, but I'm part of this extraordinary thing. And then you tiptoe into the auditorium. We're pretending this is a really good show, right? What will I talk about it not being a good show? We're sitting in this really good show, and the audience is saying to another, I've got to tell my friend about this, or we might go and buy some seats, or we might do this, and no one knows who I am, so they're talking loudly in front of me. And the beauty, I think, you know, arts managers very often don't want to be on the other side of the stage. So they very often, they disappear in amongst the crowd, and they can hear it all, and they report back, and then when they're sitting there at 3 in the morning doing the accounts, when the actors are having the party, or they're dealing with a difficult journalist, or they're doing all those sorts of things, they can hold their hair up high and say, you know what, I am part of the creative process. I am an equal partner, but I'm silent. So it's a very funny job, and it demands a certain personality. But Sunil reminded me when we were talking at lunchtime that in India, you have a slightly different environment in that generally people who are managing are doing 1,000 other things as well. It's not so different to what we do, but I know that a lot of you will act or work backstage and then manage. What I'm suggesting is, of course that's laudable. Everything that gets the production going is laudable. But I spoke to a young lady this morning who sort of said to me, but I'm ready to put my hand up and manage my organisation. Because it's that moment when someone actually steps forward and takes the stress off everybody else's shoulders that maybe, just maybe, it'll give the company enough electricity to move forward and not make everybody involved in every detail. It'll give a little bit of a calm in the storm, give a little bit of direction, so that everybody knows to come to them with that one thing, and nothing is lost. It doesn't mean they can't do other stuff as well. But it's good to find a centre point. And believe it or not, some of us, the ones who can't act, the ones who can't direct, the ones who can't rig, actually find this really fun. And they're surrounded by it. There's nothing like it, right? Well, I think so anyway. So, I wanted to talk tonight, and I gave tonight's talk of finding one's voice in arts management. And it's really about going beyond what I was calling the technical skills. So I'm going to pose a question to all of you. Can anybody, I was going to say Ruth, in this environment, tell me, is there a society that you can think of where no art form exists? No ceremony, no ritual, no drawing, no performance, anything? Do we know of any human society, any congregation of people, in any time, in any country, in any place? Nothing at all. People still did it. They weren't allowed to do it publicly. Even in Pol Pot, Cambodia. That's what got them into trouble. So, another one. Any time where children don't play, where we don't do some kind of acting out. Well, that tells us something really, really important. Because then we know that the arts are fundamental to the human condition. They're fundamental to congregation and the creation of society. They are fundamental as forms of communication. The way we communicate and express ourselves is often through the arts, through language, through acting out, through ceremony, through all of these things. So don't let anyone tell you that the arts are a luxury. They're as fundamental to our lifestyle as food and shelter, because we all express. So arts managers are often advocates for the arts. And arts managers are often called upon to talk to our subject in everybody else's language. It's got to be good economics, it's got to be good one thing or another. Essentially,
all of that may be important, and I'm not denying its impact, but if we can't say why the arts are important, why every individual who participates in them knows that they are socially significant, and this crosses all boundaries, then I don't have to say, which part of India are you from, which part of the world am I from, what is my experience, because this is a commonality. We can start advocating for the arts. And so that's the very first point that I really wanted to make tonight, that the arts are at the core of human activity. And societies then work out ways in which to support the arts and those who produce the arts, the artists. Another thing about arts management, I think this is a really big misnomer, is that people often confuse the structures that surround the arts with the arts themselves. I give you X million rupees to do something, you may or may not create art, I don't know. But judging the arts is something different. So quite often these things are looked at as if they're the same, and I would argue that they're not. So I want to go back to the fact, this subject of arts management. I think when we come to critique arts management, think about it, it often arises out of a great sense of frustration. Okay? We want to move beyond reactive management. I need money for this, how do I get it? I need those props, how do I do it? I need that actor, how am I going to solve the problem? It's reactive. There's a problem, you solve it. There's another problem, you solve it. You can get very tired very, very quickly doing that. And for me, I felt burnt out. So I ran a theatre company. I ran a big international festival of Pacific arts with 30 different nationalities, everything from the army to Tahitian priests, and doing all the logistics for that, working in the for-profit and not-for-profit. And then I thought, what do I do next? I'm exhausted. And I came across some literature that showed that arts managers burn out by the time they're 35. And I thought, yeah, I get that. Research, not that thing. It's demonstrating something that I kind of knew but couldn't really articulate. So how was I going to make use of my energies without constantly being exhausted? How was I going to learn? How was I going to teach others? And so, I wanted to stop this stopgap measurement. I had to talk to funders, to boards, to audiences, to artistic directors. I needed a shortcut in a way. So then something really weird happened, and this is a personal experience, but it's probably worthwhile talking about because it explains how I moved from doing reactively to thinking about doing, and hopefully not as reactively, and bringing other people to it. By the way, am I talking too quickly?
No.
Oh, good. My students always tell me good. So I just want to make sure. I got a call from an Australian funding agency called the Australia Council, and they did something, there's a slight irony in this, I'll tell you why, you'll hear why in a minute. They said, we've got a visiting expert coming, we think he should visit your theatre company. And I went, oh, bro, not another expat person coming to tell me what to do. And here I am today. So I'm not telling you what to do, but I remember that reaction. I said, no, I'm too busy running my theatre company, I don't need a professor. What is this? They don't need that. But what he did was he set me on a path that was really challenging, because he started to say to me, why are you doing it this way? Why are you keeping on banging your head against the wall? Why don't you come and study this discipline and see if you can actually make a difference in another way? I told him to shove it, that ivory towers were really not important, and that I was going to run my theatre company, and that was that. And then about 4 weeks later, I was miserable, because I could see the next 30 years ahead of me, and I thought, I can't do any more good. So I made a very sheepish call, and I had to go all the way to London, and we started talking about the subject. And what he asked me was, what is it that you're trying to manage? And this is what Milena was speaking about yesterday, when she spoke about the distinction between business management and arts management. Are we managing goods and services? Do the arts behave in the way that manufacturing companies do? Can we evaluate quality and output in the same way? Is there quality assurance? Can one measure the various means of production? Or what does it mean to provide a service? And all this language, while very interesting, didn't really tell me anything about my product. I can measure chocolate bars that way. I can measure the delivery of electricity. But it's a fairly reductive way of talking about the arts. And we know that none of it conveys our very excitement of the stuff of theatre. And so I wasn't convinced that this was a way to talk about it. And so the big question arose, is this a subject? Is arts management a subject? Don't the arts defy management? Isn't it their very nature to be disruptive, to be playful, to shine a light on our acts and deeds, both individually and collectively? You know, don't they take us from a satisfied place and move us to a dissatisfied place? Don't they make us doubt? Don't they make us challenge, to agree or disagree? Isn't there a terrible tension between arts making and arts institutions? And these were the questions that I began to really ask. And so this professor challenged me and provided me with a way to approach the subject. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an approach, but it's just a ginger way of thinking about this subject. He called this approach the aesthetic contract. And what did he mean by that? It was a way of reconciling the tensions between the artist, the institution, the audience, the critic, in order to make the least resistance in putting on the work itself. How can I explain this best? You know when you go to a show and there are all these forces working against you actually enjoying it. When the air conditioning's up too high, or the audience behaves in a really weird way, or the sight lines are dreadful. As arts managers, we're trying to get rid of all these things in order for the artistic work to connect directly with the audience. So this aesthetic contract becomes a critical factor. And the idea is to get the best possible relationship between the performance, or the work, and the audience. Now, so the maxim is to get the best possible work to the best possible audience, but it doesn't mean the most. So if the desired audience is one, then one it should be. If it's 100,000, then that's important. So the measurement of how many bums on seats do you have is not the critical distinction. It is, has the aesthetic contract been satisfied? You know, have all these forces at play really worked? Have they given the experience that was intended and has something happened? So this notion of bringing together in the best possible circumstances, the best possible work of art to the best possible public sounds really simple, but it's really difficult. How many times have you been to a museum and wanted to see something, and because it was popular there were so many people around it that you couldn't see the work at all? How many times have you been to a play that has such an aura about it that you almost can't enter it because you know the name of the director, or because you've been told it's extraordinary, or because something else is going on? How do you get rid of all of these things in order to create it? We know in theatre that it's not an iterative process, that unlike manufacturing, that every performance will have evoked slightly different responses. How do you then determine, how do you actually try and get that on each and every occasion? What is that relationship? He also spoke to me, so this idea was looming high, the aesthetic contract. And then he introduced another notion, and this was a notion of critique. As I said before, and you all leaned in, the end of that performance when you know the audience is there. You also know when they're not there. The audience may not be speaking, but they're not dumb. They're actually giving you all kinds of triggers. We all know when someone coughs in an auditorium and it's a bad play, everybody starts to cough. When someone wrestles, it doesn't. So there's all this kind of stuff. So how do we actually get involved in the critical process? And he brought up, and it's the only other academic I'm going to mention tonight, I promise, a guy who some of you will know through English literature called Leavis. And Leavis had a concept which he called, I love this because it sounds like science fiction, the third realm. And the third realm is a place for debate. So he might say, you know, because I brought up in an English tradition, daffodils are yellow, aren't they? But in Australia, daffodils are white. So I might look at it and I might say, yes, but I'm accepting what they're saying, but I'm thinking. And what the argument of this third realm is that you're constantly accepting what's given to you, but as an audience member you're going, yes, but. It's that's what you're doing. I agree with this proposition. Yes, but I might add a little bit more. So there's this realm of debate that enters into it. So how do we find ways of bringing art to its public? It's through this critical realm. It's through the fact that when we're all saying the yes but is getting closer and closer, and we stop worrying about extremes so that the artwork can appear. So in arts management language, these are the sorts of things that we have to pay a lot of attention to. And they're as critical to our subject as making sure that we've got our props and the actors are there and don't turn up drunk as someone said yesterday and the whole thing moves on. They're all very important. And as arts managers, we have one more job. We are very verbal in a different way, but our scripts are different. We have to find words to speak to artists. Because believe it or not, artists aren't always as easy to speak to. Then bring them along with us. We have to talk to our boards. We have to talk to funders. We have to talk to corporations. We have to find the appropriate language for numerous audiences outside of our stage. And we have to do this skillfully, because in the end we are advocates. We are the people who are often mediating between the uninitiated and uninitiated. It goes back to that very first argument that I made when I said, if you know that the arts are fundamental to human society, if you know this, it's easier to advocate, because you're not selling something frivolous. And people like to tell you that you want something that is unimportant. My view is that it is essential. And we develop arguments for that. So, you know, we develop our language and our knowledge and our way of talking about the arts, and we know of the importance to society, so that we can drive to the very core of our purpose. But I want to say a few more things about the arts, because there were some conversations over the last hour or two that triggered some thought. And I want to say that we should also realise that all societies, all parts of society appropriate the arts. And it's not always the sides of good that appropriate the arts. We'd like to think so. That, you know, a lot of you said, I do political theatre, and I was thinking, and what if they do political theatre of the other persuasion? What does that mean? Does that make that also the same integrity? I may disagree. So political propaganda of all persuasions use the arts in extraordinary ways, and especially since the beginning of the 20th century. So we need to think about that, because art is extremely malleable and can be used for all sorts of services. So it's not all, to paraphrase Matthew Arnold, sweetness and light. And we mock entertainment, but then we often only talk about one element of the art. So I wanted to raise this. The political desire to invoke the arts to create a sense of civilization is something that has happened in many societies. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about a poem by Shelley called Ozymandias. Any of you know this? So for those who don't, basically there was a mythical, I'm not sure if it's mythical, character called Ozymandias who created a statue in tribute to himself. Okay? and his civilization. And we see on the inscription, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon these stones, ye mighty, and despair." What a statement. What a civilization. And then the poet, Shelley, tells us, and this is the thing, "Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch away." So, whoever Ozymandias was, all we really know is his conceit and that which remains. We have no idea of anything else. Whatever the outcome of his ideological or political base, we realise that we cannot own our art. It may be swept away. Societies can't fix its outcome, nor how it's received, but we do know that there will always be artists. And these artists will always be testing the edges of our society. We just can't appropriate always what those edges may be. So, managing the arts, the representational, the political, the element which holds the mirror up to nature, isn't an easy task. We need to do more than have a simple toolkit, because conditions constantly change. We need to keep asking ourselves as arts managers what art means. We need to be able to understand and invoke historical arguments about our civilization, about our culture, about our aesthetics, about our politics. We need to be mindful that the reception of artistic experience does not always render immediate results. And I like to explain this in a certain way. You know, we often say teaching and learning don't happen at the same time, but you're immediately judged on what you do, you know. But I'd like to use this example. I suspect all of you had the kind of education I did, where at about the age of 8 or 9, you memorised poems and spat them back at your teacher with alarming accuracy and no delivery. Of all those poems, I would suggest that many of you at a later time in your life had something, a defeat in love, a difficult situation, whatever, and one of those stanzas or part of those poems came back into your memory. It almost came out of your mouth. And if you've had that experience, I would suggest that the art made meaning then. So just because you learned it at the age of 9, and at 39 it made sense, doesn't make it any less important. So then we have these problems of measurement in an increasingly fast world. My professor used to say to me, does it take us any longer or shorter to fall in love in this century than it did, you know, whatever before? So there are these things that are immutable. So these are the sorts of ways in which I want to understand art. We should understand that our quest for understanding between the relationship between arts and society is not superficial, but it's a way of invoking inquiry into the real kernel of the subject, for the arts are important. I don't have to convince you of this. In particular, I don't have to convince you that theatre is important, as culture is important. And all of these stem from our desire to speak to our worlds through an artistic lens. And so I really want to conclude here, rather than being too didactic, and open it up for the conversation. But I would say that it's the reason why we manage the arts. And it's as complicated and delightful and exciting as the arts which we want to nurture and foster and advocate for. And that's what I really want to say, is finding one's voice in arts management. Thanks. So I've asked a few questions, and I've been talking to people over the last few days. You've got a sense of where my sense of the subject is. That we've got skills and we've got a reason for doing things, and we've got to find a language. Some people have spoken to me in the last few days about policy, about other sort of questions. So I'm open for all, or just opening it up to a general debate. Maybe, yeah. And if there are no questions, there's no booze, so that we can have coffee, I suppose.
No coffee.
Can you say a little bit more about, you were talking about reactionary management,
Reactive management, yeah.
reactive management, say opposed to what?
Yeah, I think that for example, I discovered when I was doing reactive management that I just kept putting band-aids on things. When I went, and that's why I didn't give a full lecture, but when I went to discover that research would tell me that actually there are 3 or 4 ways in which you might approach a problem rather than the singular. That's the sort of opposition. So you might say, well, my funding runs out like this, so I've got to get more money tomorrow. I'd be more interested now in finding out the 3 or 4 different kinds of funding systems that exist and an elegant way of doing it. Or I need to put an ad in the newspaper and I don't have the money, and so I've got to raise money for it. But are there other ways in which I can arrive at the same impact and not just once? Well, how do I develop that relationship with that journalist, and what have I learned from others? So it's about a larger corpus than an immediate problem. So that's what I mean. And so that's when I said when one studies the subject, these opportunities are given to you to actually have a big sense of a corpus of understanding about how people have approached it, knowing that each time you'll have a singular issue, but it's really good to know larger questions.
So what you're saying can probably happen if, say, a group is 10 or 15 years old. But for a younger group like ours, it is a very reactionary management approach.
And that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Because now, for 10 days, you have the benefit, even as young as you are, of talking to another one, and someone might have also read a book on it, and they can bring that to the question. So it is that network which should be able to solve problems and share them. I will say, you know what, it's not a problem. Don't spend too much time on it. It's that. So that you're never too young. It's just that why do we need to reinvent the wheel all the time when we can find out from others? Because there are people in this room who will have had the same experience. And there are people who can give you books that explain that experience as well. So it's bringing all these factors together.
But you're also, am I correct to understand that you're also suggesting that instead of seeing each individual instance as a separate instance, that you learn to recognize it as a pattern that repeats.
Absolutely.
And therefore you have multiple ways of addressing that pattern, which is part of your management approach.
You know, you approached it yesterday when you were all given mission statements. And the thing was, you're all running your companies and you're talking about them. But this was you saw 20 different people approaching the problem opportunity in the same way. It allowed you to structure better how you were going to describe your company. So it was that corpus which helped with it. And I listened to those debates that went on, for a long time. But they were so valuable because they helped you bring yourself to explain your company to other people, even though you'd internalized it. And so it was, if you hadn't had the benefit of those things, then you would still be saying, my company, I know what it's about, but I don't have to necessarily tell you, or I'm not explaining it well to you as the audience. So yeah, absolutely.
You spoke of the aesthetic contract.
Yes.
Just like what exactly?
It's that relationship. It's this relationship between the work, the audience, the critical dimension, and it's about trying to get rid of all the externalities so that the art reaches its audience, and that the art itself will define what its best audience is. So it's not about measuring by bums on seats, but about communication. So it's not a written, I was talking to someone this morning, it's not about a written contract where I'll give you this and you'll give me that and there's some consideration. It's about what your audience comes in with trust. They're coming into your theatre, you're presenting them something.
You want to make sure that they're in the best condition and you are to actually listen to it. So you can mismatch an audience. A really good example of this was 1956 in England. There was a production for 56, the anniversary of the Queen. Benjamin Britten wrote a play called Gloriana, an opera. And the audience trotted in, and you can imagine what kind of audience it was. And at the end of the show, they all clapped in their gloves. No one could hear it. The show wasn't played again for 50 years. Because no one knew. And there's already, I mean, I can give you thousands of examples of things like that. But it's something tiny, right? But it was the right audience for the right conversation, etc. But the wrong thing. The amount of times people feel I can't go to that place, or if I go I have to behave in a certain way. So trying to make that audience comfortable, giving them the tools with which to understand, not giving them a program that they can't read, or understanding that there are many meanings that can be taken on. So it's taking the didactic out of it in certain ways. So it's not, the difficulty with theories is that you fit things to theories rather than theories imposing themselves on things. So you think about it very loosely, but I found a very good way in which to say, has this worked? Did it work? Did my audience, they paid their money, they went in, was it the performance? Was it something else? Was it them? If I'm talking to them about a mythology, I was talking to your filmmakers yesterday and I was saying, look, it might work for one audience and not another. If there's a performance, we were talking about Peter Brook before, he did the Mahabharata, it's going to mean something to you that it cannot possibly be to me. Am I the right audience for it? Yeah, I might be taking something different from it. But it's actually negotiated at almost that individual level. And it doesn't mean that I won't have a theatrical experience, but I won't be bringing to it or getting from it the same cultural connotations as you do. I can't. The same way that I might present something. And it doesn't mean it's not worthwhile having. So the thing is, as every theatre manager knows, I'm touring my work. I'm taking it to an unfamiliar audience. Will it work? Not only will it not work from night to night to night, what do you happen when you've got a group? Oh, I saw a production of The Crucible at the Shore Theatre in Canada. The Shore Theatre's great, it's festival, it's great, etc. These school kids have been bussed in from Toronto and clearly didn't want to be there. And they wolf whistled through most of the second act. The sense were I paid a lot of money to go and see this as my audience member. I went out and I saw the usher and I said, do something. And she said, I can't. And at the end of the show, there were 30, 40 people irate banging at the manager's door. You need to think about this. I remember one night when I was running a show and our marketing manager had a great idea that to fill it all up, she gave, and it may be politically correct, but it was the first night when the critics were in the audience, the first 200 seats were filled with autistic kids. Lovely, but they shouldn't. The aesthetic contract wasn't, you couldn't actually get the intention of that work. So it's a very difficult thing, and and it might be that your right audience is the autistic kids, or if the actors had known they're in the audience, they might have delivered it differently. So you want to make sure that your marketing office is selling it the same way as your front of house, the same way. It's all that kind of thing. When I did my research on going to the opera, I asked a really simple question. If you're going to the National Theatre or to the opera, would you wear the same clothes? Believe it or not, 90% of the respondents said I would not. So then I knew that it had nothing to do with the performance of opera and everything to do with what they thought this thing meant in their head. So you had a bigger job to bring the audience to the show. And it can happen at almost every level. So I may be making it too complicated, but but these are the considerations of art. So it's actually very practical, but it's a way of expressing it. And I would challenge. I used to say to my students,
go to a production, anything you like, and even a religious ceremony or whatever, ask yourself how you found about it, what you needed to do to prepare, who you chose to go with, or did you go alone, what you wore, whether you thought you could pass that threshold, all of the things that make up going to this experience, and then the experience itself, and then how you get out of it. It's a set of really complex problems.
Ruth?
Yeah.
I just want to share a story. Can I do that?
Yeah, go for it.
So, I don't know how many of you guys have you seen the film called Neverland?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you remember that scene? Okay, so Neverland is the story of the writer. No, that's not.
You mean Finding Neverland?
Finding Neverland, right. And it's a film where it's about the writer whose name, of course, I would remember.
Johnny
Jam
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the actor we all remember. And it's this beautiful, so he's writing this play on Peter Pan, right? And there's no story of how he comes to the play, but he's going to present Peter Pan to an English audience that is used to going to the theatre. And in this play, he has for the first time, a character like a nanny and a character playing a dog and all the stuff that does not happen on the English stage. It was such a delightful, but I think this is really partly what I'm referring to. And he has it in the movie scene. It's delicious. And so what he does is he refuses to sell. He tells his producer that these tickets you have to give me. They cannot be sold. And what he does is he gets children from an orphanage to come and watch the play. But what he does is he distributes the empty seats amongst the audience. So what happens then is that you have this proper theatre audience sitting for the premiere of a show, and you have these children who get the play. And the entire response of the play changes because the kids are reacting, and suddenly they can see it through the children's eyes. And he,
That's it, exactly. You see, there's another film, Bergman's Magic Flute, where the overture, he just focuses on children's faces. And I've never understood that work in the same way again. Yeah. So and equally, if you comp a show, we're all desperate, you want funds on seats, and you give out a whole lot of tickets, you know what happens. The people who bought the tickets get pissed. The people who bought, people who you give free tickets to quite often don't appreciate it. You get all sorts of, and it's not, you can maybe do it once, but if you do it twice, you'll never sell them again. There are all these little things that go on. The other thing I want to say about theatre management and arts management is there is no immutable rule. It changes all the time in every circumstance. In America they like to talk about Barnum as the great, circus operator. He went past 3 times without insurance. And one thing you've got to know about Barnum, and he sold seats to trains, not necessarily to a show. He worked out, he coined the phrase humbug. But the interesting thing for me about Barnum isn't all of that, it's the fact that in his spirit, in his character, he couldn't keep his hands off the stuff. He just had to keep doing. He ran something called the Great American Museum, where he fabricated all these sorts of animals and put them on and gave stories about it. He was, in the end, a consummate entrepreneur. But we just, it's not as reductive as just doing circus. But it's that spirit. So I would also say, don't do arts management if you don't like the problems, because it's everything, but it's always the problems, right? But it is good to focus the problems on one person, because you'll also find that if you're all doing that job, then when people come to you, you're going to get mixed messages. So in some ways, it's just quite efficient to have one person at the centre. Doesn't mean the person has to dictate what you do. But it's like the quiet point. When I ran the Festival of Pacific Arts, this is a long time ago in the 80s, so it was before mobile phones, we had 3,000 performers, 15 stages, and this huge amount of network. And actually we ran it from a room no bigger than this, God knows how many buses, and my job was logistics, feeding them, transporting them, and housing them. And you just have to have a quiet space.
and the best story I had about this, and this is a satisfying story about arts management. The Tahitian priest forgot his barometer to measure the stones for the firewall. And he was on an island, so he got the army helicopter to take the barometer up, fly it over and drop it down. And the performance took place. I never saw the performance, so when I went to Tahiti, they put on a firewall for me. So occasionally there were really big benefits from it. He also got off the plane without shoes, and Australia is paranoid about this kind of stuff. I had a major diplomatic incident as a Tahitian priest would not put on shoes to get up. And literally I had to call Prime Minister and Cabinet and get it sorted. This is why I say it's actually a really interesting job. But the beauty of it, getting back to your aesthetic contract, is no one knew. No one should know. The performance has to go on, right?
Oh, wow.
You just have to keep thinking it through. So I think it's immensely creative, but it has its headaches. You can have, if you've got large crowds, you've got health and security issues. That same festival, I had one murder and two deaths. 3,000 people. So we can't be Pollyanna about it. I'm not saying that we don't need to know how these things function, or that I can't operate millions of dollars if I have to. But if you've only got a budget of $1,000, it's just as important, if not more so. Okay? So it's not about, again, the aesthetic contract. It's not about the size, it's about the integrity of it. But you do need to know your stuff, but it's more important to believe in it. So, in the end, when I would watch my theatre company, which is what I learnt my stuff on, if I didn't like the show, if I couldn't believe in it, if I couldn't believe in the vision of my artistic director, why would I go to hell and back when, somebody finds out we've had a copyright infringement and are running around the theatre trying to serve me papers? You just walk away, wouldn't you? So I learned the hard way, but I believe in the product. And and actors are very good at pushing you beyond your limits. I remember being at a board meeting with a very famous actress saying, trying to tell me to do a copyright infringement, saying, the artistic director and I have 8 years experience between us. And I'm saying, I have to resign if you do this. We will do it. So I listened to her and I almost ended up in jail. So you actually also have to know, I'll never do it. And so you've got to be fairly careful. So that knowledge, but erring on the side of the art, you kind of got to. You've got to suspend disbelief anyway. You've got to believe in that vision. And I can't do that to manufacture coffee. I might get a lot of money. So it's a certain kind of sensibility, but I think that people don't talk enough about arts management. People don't talk enough. We talk a lot, and look, it's very important. In this conference, I've been listening to all these different, a polyphony of voices representing, for me this has just been such an exciting kaleidoscope of aspirations and productions and everything else. And I thought, well, how could I possibly, as an outsider, contribute to your really important conversation? It's not about imposing a system. It's talking about what is it within each one of you that may, if you're talking about managing the arts, you can bring something to your company. Not my way, but your way, because your companies are unique and your voices are unique, and everything you want to bring to the arts then has to support that. Not my way, because my way won't work. It's relevant to me culturally, in an institution, a political situation, whatever. But there are things that we all human beings love. They cry, they empathise, they create societies, they communicate. We are, even despite me who hates standing up in front of groups because I'm terrified, Milena will attest to this, you have to in the end, right? And you actors, you know what it is to reach out. And the arts can do this, and I don't know of anything else that can take me from one state and with a sleight of a hand, this image, take me to another and back again. It's magic, and that's wonderful.
I have it.
Yes.
Okay, what type of inputs normally the director gets from the director of the play gets from the arts manager, number one, and number two, I mean, how do you? I mean, is there some overlapping between the director and the arts manager when it comes to, you know?
Okay, so first of all, there are a couple of ways of looking at this. This is called the two-headed beast. You know, this is when we talk about art management or there are different ways of running companies. But traditionally, and so there's lots of debate about it, but you know, I actually come from a system where there's an artistic director and a general manager. It can be as simple as, do they have the same relationship to the board or not? You know, it can be as simple as that, like, you know. But I've found that when I've believed in the artistic director's overall product, I've been more than willing to buy into that vision. Doesn't make them more powerful. I don't have any ego in this. It's just that I don't have the artistic vision. So I want to make everything work as much as I possibly can. So I don't see it as so much as a power struggle as a team. So I've had occasions when a production manager will give me a call and say, the director's spending the entire budget, what are you going to do? It's really good to have a few of them around. And you go out for a drink and say, are you aware? And you can always squeeze, or you can try to squeeze something out of it. You say to the director, help me a bit, can you squeeze something out of the costume so we can do that? Can you have, it's conversational, right? There's no trust in stuff. You know, so you have to absolutely work on the trust. So there, again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but the artistic directors I work best with are the ones whose vision I like, the ones who want to respect what I want to do most of the time, but occasionally they do what artists do, which is go somewhere else and I have to, and you know what, you make it work. Because that's my job. So if it were for me to construct a play, it would look pretty bad. So it's funny, but it depends. But there are interesting things. Like I would argue, this is from a manager's perspective, when I'm dealing with a board, I don't want to be outvoted by an artistic director because I'm coming in with issues like budget, copyright, and all those sorts of things. And I just need to have an equal voice. They can then say, stuff all of that, we still just want to go with the vision, and I have to make it happen. But I need a voice there. But generally, you'd want to work it out over a drink. I like to go into different parts of the processes. I mean, I remember when I was managing my theatre company, there'd be, the directors on cans and they'd all shut up, right, all the chatter and But I believe you need to know the process. So I don't want to hire a follow spot operator without knowing what a follow spot is or how big they are, or so you can't be divorced from the material. But I'm not the artist. Does that help answer it? Yeah.
Thank you.
That may be it. So
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
Just to extend your ideas about both the aesthetic contracts and little louder. Sorry. To extend the idea of the aesthetic contract and the birth right, both of which are beautiful ways of looking at arts management. How much is it the responsibility of an arts manager, because most of your work is dealing with the present, how much of it is, how much do you think about when you're looking at a play or a festival, how this work will endure? How much do you think about the future of a piece of work and how that works itself into the aesthetic part?
So if the significance is about its durability, then that's the question. If it's not, it's not. I'm no longer working as an arts manager, but I have a mate, for example, who runs a Hong Kong art festival, and another friend who runs it. And I'm saying, I saw this show, it's a festival show, go and have a look at it. So even if I'm not the manager inside, you're constantly engaged in that process because your life is about talking about theatre. So it's maybe not in the direct, I'm managing this show now, but if you are of the theatre,
if you are for you have a network and a conversation that extends in so many different ways. Can this travel? Who should be seeing it? Is this the right audience? Someone's a punk. I saw a production a couple of years ago at the Adelaide Festival with King John. I phoned my mate in Hong Kong and I said, "You've got to get this show. I've really seen a production like this since Peter Brook. It's amazing." We're in 42 degrees. Australia can be awful, right? They had no air conditioning and I sat there for 3 hours riveted. You know, this is what happens. You can forget all these things. But she couldn't get that show to come because the company had no specs. It had no information. I couldn't get any publicity. I couldn't really find the general manager. And it was a company. It was run by this guy. He had a bit of money, and once every year you get these good actors together, and they work. And once every 2 years they workshop a show, and they were known to do profound work. But that work was only intended by that company, and they weren't managed as such to have the life of that festival. And it was really sad because if I were to put that up against the great shows that I've seen, that was one of them. But then when Peter Brook did Carmen, he had 3 casts. And I remember watching those in the rehearsals of that. And I remember watching and working with these casts, and they were intended for different kinds of audiences. So it was actually from the design, so it was up to his administrator to make it work. There are really good books, and I can recommend this. I don't read a lot of arts management theory, but I read a lot of books about managers talking about their companies. And I really recommend there's these books of Peter Brook about how he works with his manager, and you realise she's instrumental in a lot of the decisions that they made about space and venue and government and all those sorts of things. You read 18th and 19th century accounts of travelling theatres. You discover that shows crossed from America to England in a minute. The W.C. Field and whatever went down to Australia, and the circuits that went through India, and all of these things, they were managed. People just didn't describe it as such. So I think that arts managers are constantly negotiating.
For example, when Sweden yesterday gave this 15 or so many proposals, I think that each of you in your past developed kind of a possible aesthetic choose it by selecting.
I couldn't hear that.
Milena, we can't.
Can't hear you.
I just said yesterday when Sunil proposed this repertory and each of you had to choose one piece of show, in fact in your head, subconsciously or not, you developed analysis to create your aesthetical contract. You are going to select one piece to offer to your audience but also to your troupe, to your stakeholders, so it's really, I mean, it was that.
Yeah.
And it may be that the piece should just be performed once in its place. It may be that it should be visualized. It may be that it can be revisited. I wonder, you know, some of the great pieces that I've seen, if they will stand the test of time. But I'm bringing them, there's the other thing too, that Midsummer Night's Dream that I saw more decades ago than I would like to admit to, revisits me. So it's part of it. And that's also important. So with that audience is it's very hard, it's hard to pin down, but I think it's what we all aspire to. And that's stronger than any seat sale, which was only sold once.
Any more questions?
Yeah, any more questions? We're actually 8 o'clock.
I know,
We're
it's
perfect timing.
Good night. Thank you so much.
It was great pleasure.
So I think we can provide some links to your text.
I gave Samira a set of books.
That's
And also, I can get from you the names of the books for arts managers who will
There's a book to be written on all of that because it's all sitting in my library. Like I have every person who headed the National Endowment of the Arts in America has written a Kiss and Tell story. So there's 6 of them. So you can actually read right through them. So they're never under arts management. write these texts. You can't remember outstanding decision. He's trying to say you note it down.
Okay, thank you.